My name is Arden. I'm 29 years old, and last Tuesday, I received a text message that shattered my world. I was in California on a business trip when my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. We changed all the locks. You don't have a home anymore. Let's see how brave you are now. Haha. My heart stopped. What had I done to deserve this? Our relationship had been strained lately, but nothing warranting this level of cruelty. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from. In the comments, hit that like and subscribe button, and prepare yourself for a family betrayal that ultimately taught me what true strength means. I grew up in an affluent suburb just outside Chicago, in a brick colonial with perfectly manicured lawns and a 3-car garage. From the outside, we looked like the quintessential American success story, but appearances can be misleading. My mother, Clara, was always the undisputed authority in our household. She had a vision for what our family should be, and she enforced that vision with unwavering determination. Mom worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown and expected nothing less than perfection. Her appearance was always immaculate. Designer suits, not a hair out of place makeup, perfect, even at breakfast. She applied those same exacting standards to her children. Every test had to be an A. Every extracurricular activity had to result in an award. Every social connection had to be strategically advantageous. My father, Frank, existed somewhat in her shadow. A successful accountant, he was quiet by nature and tended to defer to my mother's judgment in most matters, especially regarding how to raise the children. He wasn't cold or distant, just conflict-averse. When Mom would criticize my career choices or appearance, Dad would offer a sympathetic glance, but rarely intervene directly. His favorite phrase seemed to be, "Listen to your mother, she knows what's best." Then there was my younger sister, Heather. 3 years my junior, she seemed to naturally embody everything our mother valued. Straight-A student, competitive tennis player, social butterfly with the right friends. While I struggled under Mom's critical eye, Heather thrived. I never resented my sister for this. We actually got along well, and she would often defend me during Mom's tirades. But there was an undeniable difference in how we were treated. I was the disappointing firstborn in my mother's eyes. Despite good grades and a relatively successful high school experience, I never quite measured up. The real rift began during my junior year of college, when I switched my major from business to journalism. Mom was livid. She had mapped out my entire future. Harvard Business School, then joining her firm, eventually taking over her client list. My decision to pursue writing was, in her words, throwing away your potential on a dying industry. The tension only escalated when I graduated and accepted a position with a digital media company in New York instead of returning to Chicago. Mom saw this as a personal rejection, not just a career choice. Dad, as usual, stayed neutral, though I could tell he was disappointed too. Heather supported my decision, even visiting me several times in my tiny Brooklyn apartment. For 6 years, I built my life in New York. I worked my way up from staff writer to senior editor at one of the most respected digital publications in the country. I made friends, dated, created a home for myself in a city I loved, but I never completely severed ties with my family. I flew back for major holidays called weekly and maintained what I thought was a reasonably healthy relationship despite the underlying tensions. My childhood bedroom remained largely untouched in my absence, a museum to my youth that Mom maintained even while complaining about my life choices. My high school trophies, old books, and even some clothes still occupied the space. I kept some personal items there too. Photo albums, journals, a collection of vintage cameras I'd inherited from my grandfather. Things too precious to risk damaging in a cross-country move, but not needed in my daily life. Over time, I thought my parents had come to accept, if not fully embrace, my independence. Mom still made occasional comments about when you come to your senses and move back home, but the outright hostility had faded. We settled into a rhythm of distant but functional family dynamics. I even helped them financially when Dad had health issues 3 years ago, flying home every other weekend for 2 months during his recovery from heart surgery. That's why the text message came as such a shock. Despite our differences, I never imagined my mother would literally lock me out of my childhood home. Something catastrophic must have happened to cause such a dramatic reaction. But what? The seeds of this conflict were planted 2 months ago during my mother's 60th birthday celebration. Mom had insisted on a lavish party at the country club with everyone dressed to impress. All her friends, colleagues, and extended family were in attendance. It was exactly the kind of formal, status-oriented event she loved, and I endured. The weekend had started pleasantly enough. I flew in from New York on Friday morning, took Mom to her favorite lunch spot, and presented her with a vintage Cartier watch I'd spent months searching for, the same model her own mother had worn. For once, she seemed genuinely pleased with me. That night, Heather arrived with her boyfriend Bradley, whom I was meeting for the first time. Bradley Whitmore came from exactly the kind of background my mother worshipped. His father owned a chain of luxury car dealerships across the Midwest and had recently partnered with my father on a commercial real estate venture. Bradley himself worked at a prestigious investment firm, drove an Aston Martin, and had the polished charm of someone who'd attended the finest private schools. He was handsome, in a conventional way. Tall, athletic build, perfect teeth, and styled blonde hair. My mother was clearly enamored. During dinner that first night, Mom made a special announcement. Heather and Bradley were officially engaged with a wedding planned for the following summer. Everyone cheered and toasted while I tried to match their enthusiasm. Something about Bradley felt off to me. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes. How his attentiveness to Heather seemed performative rather than genuine. But I dismissed these thoughts as overprotectiveness, or perhaps envy at how easily he'd won my parents' approval. The next day, as preparations for the party were underway, I found myself alone with Bradley in the kitchen. He was checking his phone constantly, and when he stepped outside to take a call, he left his device on the counter. I know I shouldn't have looked, but something compelled me to glance at the screen when a notification appeared. It was a message from someone named Melissa. "Still on for Wednesday. I miss you so much, baby. Can't wait to see you again." I was stunned. Heather was flying back to Chicago on Tuesday. She and Bradley lived in the city while my parents remained in the suburbs. The timing confirmed my worst suspicions. When Bradley returned, I confronted him privately, showing him the message I'd seen. "That's none of your business," he hissed, snatching his phone away. "Melissa is a client. You're jumping to conclusions." "Does my sister know about your special client meetings?" I asked. His expression changed from defensive to threatening. "Listen carefully," he said, voice low. "Your sister is happy. Your parents adore me. The business partnership with your father is making everyone a lot of money. Don't rock the boat with your paranoid fantasies." That evening before the party, I pulled Heather aside and told her what I'd seen. I expected her to be upset, to question Bradley, maybe even thank me for looking out for her. Instead, she erupted in anger. "How dare you try to ruin this for me?" she shouted. "Bradley already told me you were snooping through his phone and making up stories. He warned me you might be jealous because your own love life is such a disaster." I was speechless. Bradley had preemptively turned Heather against me, and she had believed him without question. Before I could respond, Mom walked in demanding to know what was happening. Heather tearfully explained that I was trying to sabotage her relationship. Mom's face hardened as she turned to me. "Why am I not surprised?" she said coldly. "You've always resented your sister's happiness. First you abandoned the family, and now you want to destroy Heather's chance at having what you rejected." "Mom, that's not what this is about." I tried to explain. "I saw messages on Bradley's phone." "Enough," she interrupted. "I will not have you spreading lies about Bradley. He is exactly the kind of man I always hoped my daughters would marry, successful and from a good family. Unlike those bohemian types you waste time with in New York." The party that night was excruciating. I maintained a fake smile as I was introduced to Bradley's parents. His father boisterous and domineering, his mother silent and observing. Mom paraded Heather and Bradley around like prized possessions, while I stood awkwardly at the periphery. Dad noticed my discomfort and approached with a glass of scotch. "Give it time, son," he said quietly. "Your mother is just excited about the engagement." "Dad, Bradley isn't who he pretends to be," I insisted. "I think he's cheating on Heather." My father sighed deeply. "Arden, sometimes it's better to keep the peace. Your mother and I trust Heather to make her own decisions." The next morning, I tried one more time to speak with my family before returning to New York. The conversation quickly descended into another argument with Bradley present, this time playing the role of the wrongfully accused perfect fiancé. When Mom suggested I might need therapy for my paranoia and jealousy issues, I finally snapped. "You've never respected my choices or trusted my judgment," I said. "But this time you're making a huge mistake. Bradley is lying to all of you, and someday you'll see it." I left amid shouts from my mother and tears from Heather. In the weeks that followed, my calls went unanswered. My texts received curt, dismissive replies. Dad sent a few neutral messages asking me to apologize, but I refused to back down when I knew I was right. Now, 6 weeks later, I was finishing a 3-week assignment in California covering a series of tech conferences for my publication. I'd been so busy, I barely had time to dwell on the family drama, assuming things would cool down eventually. The night before my flight back to New York, exhausted from my final interview, I received that chilling text from my mother. The moment I read my mother's text message, a cold wave of panic washed over me. My hands trembled as I tried calling her immediately. The call went straight to voicemail. I tried my father next. Same result. Heather's phone rang several times before disconnecting. Even the family landline, which rarely got used anymore, yielded nothing but endless ringing. I paced my hotel room, trying to make sense of what was happening. Had my confrontation with Bradley really led to this extreme reaction? Were they serious about changing the locks? Or was this some twisted attempt to scare me into apologizing? Either way, the message was cruel and calculated. Sleep was impossible that night. By morning, I had formulated a plan. First, I called Mrs. Winters, our next-door neighbor, who had lived beside my family for over 20 years. She had always been kind to me, sneaking me cookies when Mom put me on restrictive diets and attending my high school graduation when Dad had to work. "Arden, dear, how are you?" she answered warmly. "I'm doing okay, Mrs. Winters. I was wondering if you've noticed anything unusual at my parents' house lately." There was a pause before she replied, her voice now cautious. "Well, I did see some commotion a few days ago. Your father was outside with a locksmith. I thought perhaps they'd lost their keys." My stomach dropped. So they had actually changed the locks. "Mrs. Winters, has my mom said anything about me recently?" Another uncomfortable pause. "Clara did mention something at our book club last week. She said you were going through some difficulties. She asked us to pray for you." The implications were clear. My mother was spreading rumors about my mental state to explain whatever actions they were taking against me. I thanked Mrs. Winters and hung up feeling sick. Next, I called my friend Tyler, who had remained in Chicago after college and occasionally saw my parents at community events. "Dude, I was going to call you," he said when he answered. "What the hell is going on with your family? Your mom cornered my mom at the grocery store yesterday, telling her some wild story about how you had a breakdown and were making dangerous accusations against people." "What exactly did she say?" I asked, my pulse quickening. "Something about you becoming unstable, imagining conspiracies, and needing intervention. She made it sound like you were having psychotic episodes, man. My mom was really worried." The character assassination campaign was worse than I'd imagined. I checked social media and found recent posts from Heather showing her and Bradley at dinner with my parents, all smiles. The comments section included vague references to family healing and supporting those with troubles. Bradley's parents had commented, "So glad Arden is getting the help needed." I felt physically ill. Not only had I been locked out of my home, but my reputation was being systematically destroyed. People who had known me my entire life were being fed lies about my mental health to discredit anything I might say about Bradley. With shaking hands, I canceled my flight to New York and booked one to Chicago instead. This couldn't be handled from a distance. I needed to confront my family directly, to understand how things had escalated so dramatically, and to defend myself against these false narratives. I called my editor to request an additional week off, citing a family emergency. Then I contacted my friend Jason, who lived in Chicago, asking if I could crash at his place temporarily. "Of course, man. Stay as long as you need," Jason offered immediately. "What's this about?" I gave him the abbreviated version, still unable to fully articulate the betrayal I was feeling. Jason expressed disbelief at my parents' behavior, but assured me his guest room was mine for as long as necessary. While preparing for my flight, I decided to do some preliminary research on Bradley. If he was cheating on my sister, what else might he be hiding? I spent hours searching public records, social media profiles, and news archives. Most information painted the picture he wanted, presented prestigious education, successful career trajectory, philanthropic activities with his family's foundation. But then I found something interesting. A small local news article from 3 years ago mentioning Bradley's departure from his previous firm. The piece was brief and couched in positive terms. But why would someone leave a top-tier investment firm for a smaller one? It seemed like a step down rather than a career advancement. I made note of this anomaly, determined to dig deeper once I was in Chicago. If Bradley was hiding something beyond infidelity, I needed to uncover it, not just to vindicate myself, but to protect my family from whatever he might be planning. The flight to Chicago the next day was the longest 5 hours of my life. Each minute brought me closer to a confrontation I both dreaded and needed. My childhood home, once a place of conflicted comfort, had been transformed into forbidden territory. The family who should have been my greatest support had become adversaries. And somewhere in this mess of betrayal and manipulation was the truth about Bradley Whitmore. A truth I was now more determined than ever to expose. The Chicago autumn air hit my face as I exited O'Hare Airport. A familiar chill that once signaled coming home. Now it felt like walking into enemy territory. Jason picked me up in his battered Honda, offering a sympathetic smile but few words. He sensed my need for quiet contemplation before the storm. We drove past familiar landmarks. The shopping center where I'd gotten my first job, the park where Dad had taught me to ride a bike, the high school where I'd given the graduation speech. Every memory now tainted by my family's betrayal. "Want me to come with you?" Jason asked, as we approached my parents' neighborhood. I shook my head. "This is something I need to do alone, but stay close, okay?" Jason dropped me a block away from the house. I walked slowly, rehearsing what I would say, how I would remain calm, despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. The house came into view, stately, pristine, exactly as I remembered, except for the new silver BMW in the driveway, Bradley's car. My hand hesitated before pressing the doorbell. The chime echoed inside, familiar yet strange, now that I was an uninvited guest rather than a returning son. Footsteps approached, and the door swung open, to reveal my mother's shocked face. "Arden." Her voice was flat. "What are you doing here?" "You tell me, Mom. You're the one who sent that text saying I don't have a home anymore." Her expression hardened. "I meant what I said. You're not welcome here until you apologize to Bradley and Heather and get the help you obviously need." "Help for what exactly?" "For catching your precious future son-in-law cheating on my sister." Before she could respond, my father appeared behind her. His face showed conflict, concern mixed with discomfort. "Son," he began tentatively, "this isn't the way to handle things." "How should I handle it, Dad?" "You changed the locks on me. You're telling people I'm having mental problems. What happened to the parents who taught me to stand up for the truth?" Mom scoffed. "The truth? You've been jealous of Heather's happiness from the moment she announced her engagement. You can't stand that she's building the life you rejected. A respectable career, a good man from a proper family, staying close to home instead of running away to New York to work for that liberal website." The accusation was so absurd, I almost laughed. "Is that what you think this is about, Mom? I saw Bradley's messages with my own eyes. He's cheating on Heather, and he threatened me when I confronted him." "More lies," she snapped. "Bradley warned us you might show up with these delusional accusations." "Let me guess. He also suggested changing the locks." A flicker of something, guilt perhaps, crossed my father's face, but he remained silent. Just then, a silver Mercedes pulled into the driveway. Heather emerged from the passenger side with Bradley behind the wheel. Her expression shifted from surprise to anger when she saw me. "What is he doing here?" she asked, rushing to stand beside our mother. Bradley approached more slowly, his face a mask of practiced concern. "Arden, we're all worried about you, man. These paranoid delusions, these accusations. It's not healthy." My blood boiled at his sanctimonious tone. "Drop the act, Bradley. I know what I saw. I know what you're doing." "See what I mean?" Bradley addressed my parents, ignoring me. "These conspiracy theories are getting worse. My cousin is a psychiatrist. He says this kind of paranoia can escalate if left untreated. I'm not paranoid. I insisted, looking directly at Heather. He's manipulating all of you. Enough. My mother's voice cut through the tension. Arden, if you can't be civil, then you need to leave. We've already discussed this as a family, and we've decided boundaries are necessary until you get professional help. You're choosing him over your own son. The words came out more pleading than I intended. My father finally spoke up. Arden, please. Just take some time. Get some perspective. When you're ready to apologize, we can talk. Bradley stepped forward, voice lowered to a menacing whisper only I could hear. I warned you not to interfere. You should have stayed in New York. If you continue with these accusations, I'll have no choice but to pursue legal action for defamation. Before I could respond, 2 police cars pulled up to the curb. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. We called them before you arrived, my mother explained coldly. Mrs. Winters saw you walking toward the house and texted me. You're trespassing now, Arden. The officers approached cautiously. Is there a problem here? One asked. This is my son, my father explained uncomfortably. But we've asked him not to come to the property right now. There's been some family disagreements. The officer turned to me. Sir, if the homeowners are requesting you leave, you'll need to comply. The humiliation burned through me. My own parents had called the police rather than listen to me. I looked at each of their faces. Mom's righteous anger, Dad's conflict, Heather's hurt, and Bradley's smug satisfaction, and realized this battle couldn't be won today. I'll go, I said quietly. But this isn't over. As the police escorted me to the end of the driveway, I glanced back at my childhood home. Through the garage window, I could see piles of what appeared to be my belongings. Boxes and bags hastily packed and removed from my room. They had truly evicted me from my own history. Jason was waiting around the corner, having witnessed everything. He didn't speak as I collapsed into his passenger seat, the weight of rejection crushing me. We drove in silence to his apartment, where I finally broke down completely. All the pain, betrayal, and anger poured out in waves of grief. Later that evening, Jason drove me back to my parents' house when we knew they would be attending a charity function. As expected, the street was quiet, the house dark. We parked a few houses down and walked to the rear of the property. There, scattered across the back lawn and piled haphazardly next to the garbage bins, were the contents of my childhood room: clothes, books, memorabilia. Most devastating were the damaged photo albums containing irreplaceable family pictures, now warped from exposure to the elements. My grandfather's vintage camera collection lay in pieces, seemingly deliberately broken. We worked quickly, loading what we could salvage into Jason's car. Most items were damaged beyond repair, but I recovered my journals, some photographs, and a few keepsakes that had somehow survived intact. The rest, including furniture, electronics, and larger items, had either been discarded elsewhere or destroyed. Back at Jason's apartment surveying the meager remains of my past, I reached rock bottom. My family had not only rejected me, but had systematically erased evidence of my existence in their lives. For standing up for the truth, I had lost everything. My home, my family connections, even my history. That night, lying on Jason's couch, surrounded by the ruins of my childhood, I contemplated giving up. Maybe I should just return to New York, accept the loss, and try to rebuild my life, without the family who had so thoroughly abandoned me. But something within me refused to surrender. Not when I knew I was right, not when my sister's future was at stake, and certainly not when Bradley Whitmore was still manipulating the people I loved. Tomorrow would bring new battles, but tonight I allowed myself to grieve for what was broken, possibly beyond repair. The next morning, I woke with renewed determination. If my family wouldn't believe my word against Bradley's, then I needed irrefutable evidence. Jason had already left for work, leaving a note offering his apartment for as long as I needed. His kindness was a stark contrast to my family's cruelty. I started methodically creating a plan of action. First, I needed to locate Melissa, the woman from the text messages. Then I needed to dig deeper into Bradley's professional background, specifically his suspicious job change. Finally, I had to find a way to legally protect myself against his defamation threats. Around noon, Jason called with unexpected news. I talked to my cousin Sarah, he said. She's an attorney who specializes in family law and financial fraud. She wants to meet with you. 3 hours later, I sat across from Sarah in her downtown office. She was younger than I expected, perhaps early 30s, but her demeanor exuded competence and compassion. Jason told me the basics, she began after introductions. But I'd like to hear everything from you, including any suspicions about Bradley beyond the infidelity. I recounted the entire saga from the text message I'd seen to my family's extreme reaction. Sarah listened intently, occasionally making notes. The intensity of their response is disproportionate, she observed when I finished. Changing locks, calling police, destroying property. These are extreme measures for what should have been a family disagreement. It suggests Bradley has considerable influence over your parents, particularly your mother. He's exactly the kind of man she always wanted me to be, I admitted bitterly. Successful, polished, from the right social circle. And possibly involved with your father's business, Sarah added. You mentioned a partnership between your father and Bradley's father? Yes, some kind of commercial real estate venture. Dad was excited about it, said it was his chance to expand beyond accounting. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. Let's focus on finding this Melissa first. She might provide crucial testimony about Bradley's character. Using social media analysis and cross-referencing mutual connections, we identified 3 potential Melissas who might be connected to Bradley. The most promising was Melissa Donovan, a client relations manager at a competing investment firm. Her profile showed she had attended several of the same charity events as Bradley in recent months. I created a fake social media account and sent her a message explaining that I was Heather's brother and concerned about her relationship with Bradley. To my surprise, Melissa responded almost immediately. I wondered when someone from his real life would figure it out, her message read. Bradley told me he and his fiancé had an understanding. When I realized that was a lie, I tried to break it off, but he keeps pulling me back in. I'm not the only one either. My hands shook as I read her response. Would you be willing to talk to me in person? I typed back. We arranged to meet the following day at a coffee shop far from the financial district where Bradley worked. Melissa arrived wearing large sunglasses and a scarf, despite the mild weather, clearly concerned about being recognized. Bradley has a pattern, she explained after I'd introduced myself. He targets women who can be useful to him professionally. Our firm handles accounts that compete directly with his. The information I've shared with him. She trailed off, looking ashamed. He manipulated you, I assured her. Just like he's manipulating my family. There's more you should know, she continued. Bradley was forced out of his previous firm because of ethical violations, trading based on inside information. Nothing was ever proven legally, but the partners gave him an ultimatum: resign quietly, or be reported to the Securities and Exchange Commission. This aligned with the article I'd found about his job change. But Melissa's next revelation was even more disturbing. He's been asking me questions about investment strategies for family trusts, specifically how to become a signatory with limited oversight. He mentioned your father's name several times. My blood ran cold. You think he's planning to access my father's money? I think that's why he's rushing this engagement, Melissa confirmed. Bradley lives well beyond his means. Designer clothes, luxury cars, expensive dinners, but his actual salary couldn't support that lifestyle. He needs access to significant funds soon. Armed with this information, I returned to Sarah's office. She listened gravely to Melissa's claims. If Bradley is attempting to defraud your father, we have grounds to investigate, she said. But we need solid evidence, not just hearsay. Over the next 3 days, we built our case. Sarah used legal channels to obtain records of Bradley's previous employment termination. I managed to connect with a former colleague of his who confirmed the insider trading rumors. Most crucially, we discovered through public records that Bradley had recently co-signed on a commercial property loan with my father, a transaction that made little financial sense for Dad, but benefited Bradley enormously. We also learned that Bradley had 3 previous engagements in the past 5 years, all to women from wealthy families, all broken off under mysterious circumstances. His pattern was becoming clear: charm his way into affluent families, integrate himself financially, then extract value before moving on. The final piece fell into place when Melissa provided copies of text messages where Bradley explicitly asked for confidential client information. In one exchange, he wrote, "Once I'm officially part of the Anderson family, I'll have access to their trust. We can both benefit from this arrangement." Sarah reviewed our evidence with a grim expression. "This is enough to warrant a formal investigation," she concluded. "But be prepared. Your family may still take his side initially. The psychological manipulation he's employed has been extremely effective. We developed a strategy. Rather than confronting my family directly again, we would approach their lawyer presenting our evidence professionally. Sarah would request a meeting to discuss concerning financial irregularities without initially revealing my involvement. That evening, I recorded a detailed conversation with another of Bradley's former colleagues who had witnessed his unethical behavior firsthand. The man spoke candidly about Bradley's reputation within the financial industry, charming on the surface, but utterly untrustworthy. "Everyone knows not to do business with Whitmore," he explained. "But he keeps finding new victims who haven't heard the warnings yet." With each piece of evidence we gathered, my anger toward Bradley intensified, but so did my determination to protect my family, even if they had rejected me. They were still victims in this scenario, manipulated by someone who had studied their vulnerabilities and exploited them masterfully. As we finalized our approach, I couldn't help wondering if it would be enough. Would my parents finally see Bradley for who he truly was? Or had his influence over them become too powerful to break? The answers would come soon enough. But for now, all I could do was prepare for the confrontation that would either restore my family or sever our bonds forever. The email arrived at 6:32 on a Wednesday morning, nearly 2 weeks after my mother's text message had upended my life. The sender was Richard Grayson, my parents' longtime attorney, who had handled everything from their wills to business contracts for over 20 years. The subject line was simple, but ominous: urgent matter. The body contained just 2 sentences. "We have a problem. Call immediately." My heart raced as I dialed the number. Richard answered on the first ring, his normally measured voice tinged with stress. "Arden, thank goodness. How quickly can you come to my office?" "I can be there in an hour," I replied already, reaching for my shoes. "What's happened?" "I'd rather not discuss it over the phone, but it concerns Bradley Whitmore and your father's investments. Your parents are here with me now." I froze. "Are they willing to see me?" There was a pause, then murmured voices in the background. "Yes," Richard finally answered. "In fact, they're insisting on it." Jason lent me his car, and I drove downtown in a state of nervous anticipation. The law offices of Grayson and Palmer occupied the 22nd floor of a glass tower with sweeping views of Lake Michigan. As the elevator ascended, so did my anxiety. What had changed? Why were my parents suddenly willing to see me after their dramatic rejection? Richard's assistant led me into the conference room, where my parents sat side by side, looking years older than when I'd last seen them. Mom's perfect appearance had slipped. Her hair lacked its usual precision, her makeup minimal. Dad's shoulders were hunched, his expression defeated. Neither looked up as I entered. Richard closed the door behind me and gestured to a chair across from my parents. "Thank you for coming so quickly, Arden. We have a situation that requires immediate attention." "What kind of situation?" I asked cautiously. My father finally raised his eyes to meet mine. "Bradley has been arrested," he said, voice barely above a whisper. "Securities fraud and embezzlement." The news should have brought vindication, but seeing my parents' devastation, I felt only sadness. "When did this happen?" "Yesterday afternoon," Richard explained. "The Securities and Exchange Commission has been investigating him for months. They froze all his accounts, including several joint accounts he had established with your father." Mom spoke for the first time, her voice brittle. "He told us they were investment vehicles for the wedding. Frank signed the paperwork without reading everything carefully." "How bad is it?" I asked Richard. "Potentially very serious. Your father signed documents that could implicate him in Bradley's schemes, though I believe we can prove he was misled. The immediate concern is that nearly $300,000 of your parents' money is currently frozen in these accounts." My mother's composure finally broke. "We could lose everything, Arden. The house, our retirement." She couldn't finish the sentence. Despite everything they had done, the locks, the police, the destruction of my belongings, I couldn't gloat in their misfortune. These were still my parents, and they had been victims of a calculated predator. I can help, I said quietly. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me in surprise. What do you mean? My father asked. I've been investigating Bradley since the day you changed the locks. I have evidence that he deliberately targeted our family, that he has a history of financial manipulation, and that he misled you into signing those documents. Richard leaned forward, suddenly alert. What kind of evidence? I explained everything. Melissa's testimony, the former colleagues who had spoken about Bradley's shady reputation, the pattern of failed engagements to women from wealthy families, and most importantly, the text messages explicitly discussing his plans to access the family trust. I've been working with an attorney named Sarah Keller. She specializes in financial fraud cases like this. She helped me compile everything legally and properly. Richard was already reaching for his phone. I know Sarah. She's excellent. If she's vetted this evidence, it could be extremely helpful. Where is Heather? I asked, suddenly realizing my sister's absence. My mother's face crumpled. She's devastated. She refused to come with us today. She still believes Bradley is innocent, that this is all some terrible misunderstanding. Or that I somehow set him up. I guessed. Dad nodded reluctantly. That was suggested. The pain of that accusation stung, but I pushed past it. I'd like to see her. She won't see anyone right now, Mom replied. She's locked herself in her apartment since the arrest. Richard finished his call with Sarah and turned back to us. Sarah is bringing over the files right now. This could significantly help your case, Frank. If we can prove you were deliberately misled, the prosecutors might focus solely on Bradley. My parents exchanged glances, a silent communication I couldn't interpret. Finally, Mom looked at me directly. Why would you help us after what we did to you? She asked, her voice small. The question hung in the air between us, weighted with years of complicated history. Because you're my family, I answered simply, and because it was the right thing to do. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of legal meetings. Sarah and Richard worked together, combining their expertise to build a case that would protect my parents, while providing the authorities with everything we had discovered about Bradley's schemes. By Thursday afternoon, we had secured a partial release of my father's personal accounts, separating them from Bradley's fraudulent activities. The prosecutors were receptive to our evidence, particularly the pattern of behavior established through Bradley's previous employment and relationships. That evening, we finally convinced Heather to meet with us at Richard's office. She arrived looking haggard, her eyes red from crying, her usual vibrancy dimmed. I don't want to hear any "I told you so," she said immediately upon seeing me. That's not why I'm here, I assured her. Richard and Sarah presented the evidence gently but thoroughly. Heather listened in silence, occasionally wiping away tears, as the full extent of Bradley's deception became clear. When they played the recording of his former colleague describing his predatory financial practices, she abruptly stood and left the room. I found her in the hallway staring out at the city lights. He told me you were unstable, she said, without turning around. That you were jealous and making things up, and I believed him over my own brother. He was very convincing, I offered, standing beside her. He manipulated all of us. Not you, she countered. You saw through him immediately. I got lucky. I saw that text message by accident. Heather finally turned to face me. Mom and Dad threw you out. They changed the locks. They called the police on you. How can you even stand to be in the same room with them? It was a question I had been asking myself. I'm still trying to figure that out, I admitted. But right now, helping bring Bradley to justice seems more important than holding on to anger. The next morning brought the confrontation I had both dreaded and anticipated. Bradley, released on bail, had requested a meeting with his lawyer, my parents, and Richard. He didn't know I would be there, nor that Sarah would be representing my family's interests. The meeting took place in a sterile conference room at Bradley's attorney's firm. When I walked in behind my parents, Bradley's practiced smile faltered momentarily before resuming its place. Arden, he nodded coolly. I should have known you'd find a way to insert yourself into this misunderstanding. This is well beyond a misunderstanding. Mr. Whitmore, Sarah interjected, laying out a folder of documents. We have extensive evidence of your deliberate fraud against the Anderson family. For the next hour, Sarah methodically presented our case, the timeline of Bradley's integration into the family, his careful manipulation, and the paper trail of financial misconduct. With each new piece of evidence, Bradley's confident facade cracked further. By the time Sarah played the recording of his conversation with Melissa, explicitly discussing his plans for the family trust, his attorney was frantically scribbling notes. "These are serious allegations," Bradley's lawyer finally said. "We'll need time to review this material. The SEC and prosecutor's office already have copies of everything Richard countered. I suggest your client consider cooperation as his best option at this point." Bradley's composure finally collapsed completely. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted desperately. "Frank, Clara, you know me. We're going to be family. I would never intentionally mislead you." My father, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally spoke. "You used my daughter to get to my money. You nearly destroyed my family. We are not and never will be family." Bradley turned to me, eyes narrowed. "You orchestrated this whole thing. You were jealous from the beginning, jealous that I had your parents' approval when you never could. The accusation might have wounded me weeks ago, but now it only confirmed how thoroughly he had studied our family dynamics to exploit them." "No, Bradley," I replied calmly. "You did this to yourself. All I did was expose the truth." As we left the meeting, my mother surprised me by taking my hand, a gesture of affection I couldn't remember her offering since I was a child. "I don't know if you can ever forgive us," she said quietly, "but I hope someday you'll give us the chance to try to make this right." It wasn't a full apology, nor an acknowledgement of the deeper issues in our relationship, but it was a beginning. The real healing, if it was possible, would take much longer than one dramatic confrontation. But for the first time since receiving that cruel text message, I felt a flicker of hope that my family might someday be whole again. 3 months passed before I moved my few remaining possessions back into my childhood home. Not permanently, my life was firmly established in New York, but for an extended visit that represented the first tentative steps toward healing our fractured family. The aftermath of Bradley's arrest had been messy and painful. His case was still moving through the legal system, with multiple charges of securities fraud, wire fraud, and attempted embezzlement. My parents had recovered most of their financial investments thanks to Richard and Sarah's skilled legal work, though the emotional toll had been significantly higher. Heather had retreated from everyone, initially taking a leave of absence from her job and canceling all social engagements. The embarrassment of having her engagement exposed as a calculated fraud, combined with the realization that she had rejected her brother's warnings, left her struggling with both shame and grief. It took weeks of gentle persistence before she would even speak to me on the phone. Our first real conversation had been awkward and tear-filled. "I should have trusted you," she said simply. "He was manipulating all of us," I reminded her. "You weren't the only one who believed him. But I chose him over my own brother. I let them lock you out of your home." The pain in her voice was genuine, and despite my own lingering hurt, I couldn't bear to see her suffering. "We both made mistakes," I offered, "but we're still siblings. That hasn't changed." Rebuilding trust with my parents proved more complicated. The damage done wasn't just from the Bradley incident, but from years of accumulated resentments, disappointments, and misunderstandings. Mom had been the architect of my rejection, but Dad's silent complicity had been equally painful. 2 months after Bradley's arrest, I agreed to meet them for dinner during a weekend trip to Chicago for work. We sat in an upscale restaurant surrounded by other families enjoying normal evenings while we navigated the minefield of our broken relationship. "I don't even know where to begin," my mother said after our drinks arrived. Her usual commanding presence had diminished, replaced by an uncertainty I'd never witnessed before. "Maybe with why you sent that text message," I suggested. "Why you felt the need to be so cruel." She looked down at her hands. "Bradley convinced us you were unstable, possibly dangerous. He showed us altered messages he claimed were from you threatening him. The locks were his suggestion, but the wording of the text—" She paused. "That cruelty was mine. I wanted to hurt you because I believed you were trying to hurt us." Dad reached over to cover her hand with his. "We should have questioned it more," he admitted. "Deep down, I knew something wasn't right. You've never been violent or unstable, even when we disagreed. I failed you by not speaking up." Their explanations weren't justifications, but they offered context for actions that had seemed incomprehensibly harsh. The knowledge that Bradley had fabricated threats from me explained some of their extreme reaction, though not all of it. And my belongings, I asked? The damaged photos? The broken cameras? Mom's face flushed with genuine shame. Bradley and his father helped clear out your room. We didn't realize how thorough they had been until later. The damage wasn't intentional on our part, but that doesn't excuse it. As painful as these conversations were, they represented the first honest communication we'd had in years. Possibly ever. Without Bradley's manipulative presence, we were finally addressing the fundamental issues in our family dynamics. Over the following weeks, we continued these difficult discussions. I learned that Mom's perfectionism stemmed from her own childhood with critical, unpleasable parents. Dad's passivity was his misguided attempt to maintain peace in a household where his own father's anger had created constant tension. Understanding their patterns didn't erase the hurt they'd caused, but it helped me see them as flawed individuals rather than malicious actors. For their part, my parents began to recognize how their treatment of me had caused genuine damage. Mom acknowledged her tendency to value appearance over authenticity, while Dad confronted his failure to protect me from her harsher criticisms. These realizations didn't come easily, or quickly, but they represented genuine progress. Heather and I rebuilt our relationship more naturally. Once the initial barrier of guilt had been breached, we found our way back to the sibling bond we'd always shared. She eventually returned to work and slowly rejoined social activities, though she remained understandably cautious about new relationships. As for me, the experience had changed me in ways I was still discovering. The betrayal had been devastating, but my response to it revealed strengths I hadn't known I possessed. I had stood firm in the truth despite overwhelming opposition. I had investigated thoroughly rather than acting impulsively. And perhaps most surprisingly, I had found the capacity to help the very people who had hurt me most deeply. When I finally returned to my parents' house that spring, Mom had prepared my old room with painstaking care. She had tracked down replacements for some of my lost possessions and created a photo album documenting my childhood and achievements, a silent acknowledgement of the history she had temporarily rejected. "We can never replace what was lost," she said, as she showed me the room. "Not just the physical items, but the trust. I know that." "Trust can be rebuilt," I told her. "Slowly with consistent effort on both sides." That evening we sat together in the backyard, where my belongings had once been discarded. Dad grilled steaks, while Mom and Heather prepared a salad in the kitchen. The scene was deceptively normal, though we all felt the weight of recent events. "I'm thinking of moving back to Chicago," I said as we ate. "Not permanently, but maybe splitting my time. My publication is expanding their Midwest coverage, and they need someone to head the new office." The offer had come unexpectedly, and my initial reaction had been reluctance. New York was my home now, my escape from family complications. But the recent months had shown me that running away hadn't solved the underlying issues. It had merely postponed the inevitable confrontation. "You would do that?" Mom asked, surprise evident in her voice. "After everything?" "Not for you," I clarified. "Or at least not only for you. This experience has taught me that relationships require active maintenance. Distance made it too easy for all of us to avoid the real problems." Dad nodded thoughtfully. "We have a lot of lost time to make up for." The healing wasn't instantaneous or complete. There were still difficult moments, uncomfortable silences, and occasional retreats into old patterns. But there was also a new honesty between us. A willingness to acknowledge hurt, rather than burying it beneath politeness or avoidance. Bradley eventually accepted a plea deal, avoiding a full trial, but receiving a substantial sentence for his financial crimes. The news brought little satisfaction. No punishment could undo the damage he had caused to our family and others before us. What did bring healing was the work we all put into rebuilding what had been broken. Mom started therapy confronting her perfectionism and control issues. Dad found his voice learning to express his opinions even when they differed from Mom's. Heather channeled her experience into volunteer work with financial literacy programs, helping others avoid similar manipulations. And I learned perhaps the most valuable lesson of all that truth. Even when painful, is ultimately less destructive than comforting lies. That standing firm in that truth requires courage, but yields integrity. And that family, despite its capacity to wound us deeply, also holds the potential for profound healing when genuine effort is applied from all sides. 6 months after that devastating text message, we celebrated Thanksgiving together in the house that had once locked me out. The meal wasn't perfect. Mom burned the rolls. Dad carved the turkey unevenly, and Heather's pumpkin pie had a slightly soggy bottom. But the imperfections felt right somehow, a testament to our new willingness to be authentic rather than maintaining appearances. As we shared what we were grateful for, my mother reached for my hand across the table. "I'm thankful for second chances," she said, tears in her eyes. "And for a son who was brave enough to stand up for the truth even when no one would listen." The road ahead would still have difficulties, no doubt. True reconciliation is never a straight path, but a winding journey with occasional backsliding. Yet I knew now that family bonds, though they can be stretched and strained to near breaking, have remarkable resilience when nurtured with honesty, forgiveness, and consistent effort. The locks on the doors had been changed back months ago, but the more significant change had happened within each of us. Locks on hearts and minds opening to new understandings and deeper connections than we had ever thought possible. Have you ever stood up for the truth when everyone around you refused to believe, or experienced a betrayal that eventually led to something stronger being built in its place? Share your story in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe if this resonated with you, and remember that sometimes the most painful experiences can lead to the most profound growth. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it helps anyone facing similar struggles with family or relationships.